Hello everyone, welcome to the module 2. In the last module we discussed about the Splunk basic overview, that what is Splunk, how we can install Splunk and how we can download Splunk setup from the Splunk website. Okay, also we discussed that how we can configure Splunk using the setup which we have downloaded. On after that we discussed about the Splunk basic components. Okay, so now in the module 2 we will discuss more about Splunk components, like how we can configure each and every component which we discussed. Also we will discuss that what are the indexes and how we can create indexes in our Splunk environment. Okay, so let's continue and move to the next slide, which is Splunk search head. Okay, we discussed that there are 4 components which Splunk has, like one is Splunk search head, second is Splunk indexer, the third is Splunk forwarder, and the last one is deployment server. So in this module we will discuss how we can configure search head, indexers and forwarders. The deployment server we will discuss in the later sessions in the app deployment topic. Okay, so let's begin and see how we can configure the search head. So to configure the search head, first we have to identify the server, that which server we want to make as a search head. So once we identify it, then we will go and install Splunk on that particular server. Okay, so once the Splunk is set up, then we will go and configure the Splunk search head. There are some configuration which we have to make, which we will discuss, and then we have to do configure the distributed search setup, which we will discuss. So this is the Splunk home screen which we discussed last time in the module 1. Let me go and open that Splunk login screen again. So this is the Splunk login screen which we discussed. Let me log in into this using the admin username and the password. So this is the Splunk login screen. Let's go to search and reporting. Here you see the Splunk search box. Okay, where we can write the Splunk queries to see the results. Let's move to the next slide, which is configure search pairs. Okay, so to configure Splunk search head, first we have to identify the server, then we have to install the Splunk enterprise on that server, then we have to configure the search pairs. So to configure search pairs, we have to go to settings, then distributed search. We will have to click on the search pair, then new search pair, and then we will have to add the details of the indexers. Okay, the indexers which we have already discussed. What are indexers? Indexers are nothing but are used to store the data which we forward from the forwarders. We store that data in the form of indexes. Okay, so let me go to Splunk screen again and see let me show how we can configure the search pairs. Okay, so for that we go to settings and there is one option, distributed search. Let me open this. In this distributed search window, there are 2 options. First is distributed search setup, and then is the next one is search pairs. Let's move to distributed search setup first. Let me open this. Here are some configuration which we have to make. The defaults are turn on the distributed search, which is yes. It will be default yes, but we can do no if we want, but we have to basically search from the search head. We have to do search from the search head. That's why we are making it as yes. Okay, the others are some timeout settings. One is the status timeout and the second is server timeout. So these all settings are in this all settings are in seconds. 10 seconds for the status timeout and 10 seconds for the server timeout. Okay, we set up this status timeout. It is mentioned here that set how long to wait for a server to return before removing it from the peers list. Peers list is nothing but the search peers list which we will add on the search head. I will show you how we can add the search peers. Okay, the second setting is server timeout. Set how long to wait for a search to return before removing timeout servers from the peers list. Okay, so these are some default setting. 10 seconds, you can increase it to 100 seconds or 200 seconds. It basically depends on your requirement, that how long you want a search head to wait for the server or status timeout. Okay, so these are the some default settings which will not change, and let's cancel this. Then we will go to search pairs. This is very important option. Let me open this. In the search pairs, there is one button, new search pair. We have to add this, click on this to add the new search pair in our Splunk search head. Okay, so search pair and indexers are the same term, means the terms are different, but the use of these search pairs and indexers are same, right? So indexers are the servers which stores the data, and search pairs are also the indexers which are being searched from this search head. Okay, so we are assuming that this is our search head which we just installed and configured. Okay, so this is our search head and we are configuring this server as a search head. Okay, so to configure search head, we have to add search pairs in this. So search pair is nothing but the indexers. So we have to specify the name of this indexers, like suppose our indexer name is indexer 1. Okay, so if it is indexer 1, then after that we have to provide the management port. The default management port is 8089. Okay, here also you can see the instructions are written that we have to add the server name colon management port. Okay, once it is done, then we have to go and provide the name of the server. So the name of the server is admin and the password. Okay, so after that we have to just go and click on save button. Okay, let me click on save. It will not it will give an error like cannot resolve the host name, because we provided a dummy indexer name, right? We don't have any indexer yet in our environment. So this is how we can create the search pairs. Once if that indexer is available, then it will go and create a row in the search pairs, like here it will create a row here. Okay, so once it's done, then this particular search head can go and search the data from that particular indexer, the indexer 1. Okay, So I'm writing that all the indexer names and search names in the notepad so that you can understand easily. So the indexer which we will create will be named as a indexer 1. Okay, if there are 2 indexers, then the next one is indexer 2, and so on. Okay, our search head is sh1, and the forwarders. Okay, so the forwarder name will be forwarder 1. These are the some name which we will use in this session. Okay, so as I show you that how we can add the search pairs using the new search pair. If there are 2 indexers, then we can add these 2 indexers with the management port 8089. Okay, then there will be 2 rows visible here. One is for indexer 1 and the second is for indexer 2. Suppose you are going to retrieve data from 2 indexers, then you have to add multiple indexers using this option. Okay, one is indexer 1 and one is indexer 2, and this is our search head, which is sh1. Okay, so let's move to the slides again. So we discussed that how we can add the search pairs, right, and how we can add the details of the indexers on the search pairs. Let's move ahead. The next component of Splunk is Splunk indexers. Okay, we discussed how we can configure the search head. The next topic is Splunk indexers. Okay, so in the same way, we have to identify the server for indexer, that which server we want to make as an indexer. Once it is identified, then we will go and install Splunk on that particular server which we are going to make as an indexer. Okay, so once the Splunk is set up, then we will go and set up server as an indexer. Okay, so once the indexer is set up, then we will go and create the indexes on that particular server. Okay, so here I mentioned that how we can add the new indexes. I will discuss in detail that how we can create the indexes. Okay, let's move to the next slide, that how we can configure the receiving. It means that how we can configure the indexers. Okay, we discussed how we can configure the search heads. Now we are discussing how we can configure the indexers. Okay, so to configure the indexers, we go to settings, forwarding and receiving, then we go and click on the configure receiving, then we click on new and we add the port to receive events. Okay, let me show it in the Splunk web UI. Okay, so under the settings, there is one option, forwarding and receiving. Okay, under this option, under this window, there is one option, configure receiving. When we click on this, it will give us the option to add the new receiving port. Let me click on this. Now it will ask you that on which port you want to receive the data from forwarders. Okay, so the default port is 9997. Okay, we can change this port also, but here we are just using the default port which is recommended by Splunk. Now we will go and save this. See, we have added a new receiving port from this option and it is now showing as a 9997. The status is enabled. We can also disable it if we want to, but now we want to enable it because we want to receive data from the forwarders. Okay, so this is how we can configure the indexers. Okay, so we discussed how we can configure the search heads, and now we discuss how we can configure the indexers. I am using the same server as a search head and indexer, but in the distributed environment there may be different servers for receiving for the indexers, for the search heads, for the deployment server. Okay, but currently I have only one instance, that's why I am using this instance as a search head as well as an indexer. Okay, so to set up the indexers, we go to settings, forwarding and receiving, and to set up the search head we go to distributed search and add the search pairs. Okay, so as we have added this port, it means that this 9997 port should be open between indexers and the forwarders, which will send data to the indexer. Okay, also we discussed about the 8089 port for the distributed search, right, for the search pairs. So that 8089 port should be open between search head and the indexers. Okay, okay, so let me explain again that 8089 port should be open between sh1 and indexer 1. If there are multiple indexers, then 8089 port should be open between sh1, indexer 1 and indexer 2. Okay, from sh1 to these two servers. And for the 9997, this is the forwarding port, as we added it as a receiving port. So we normally call this port as a forwarding port because using this port we send data from forwarder to indexers. Okay, so this 9997 port should be open between indexer 1 and forwarder 1. In the same way, it should be open between indexer 2 and forwarder 1. Okay, because we are going to send data from forwarder 1 to these both indexers. Okay, if you want to send data from forward 1 to indexer 1 only, then it is not required to open 9997 port from indexer 2. Okay, all right, so this is how we open ports. These are all firewall ports, which are the TCP ports. So you should when you will go and set up the environment, you have to ask your network teams to open the ports 8089 and 9997 ports between all the servers, Splunk servers. Okay, so now let me tell you that how we can create the indexes. So as we are assuming this is our indexers, then we have to create indexes on this server only. All right, so to create the indexes, we go to settings. There is one option, indexes. We go and click on this. Then there is one option, new index. Let's click on this, and here you can provide the name of your new index which you are going to create on the indexer. Suppose I want to create an index with the Splunk _ training name. Okay, then there are some optional fields which you can specify whether it should be what should be the home path. If you are not specifying, then it will go and add it in the default Splunk home path. Then you have to specify what should be the cold or hot path. These are all buckets, Splunk index buckets. Okay, and what should be the maximum size of entire index, okay, max size of the hot, warm and cold buckets. Okay, so these are the basic buckets of Splunk indexes. Fine. So whenever you get data from forwarder, first it will go to the hot bucket. Okay, once after a certain period of time, hot bucket will roll out the data to the warm bucket. Okay, and after a certain period of time, warm bucket will roll data to the cold bucket. Okay, so it based on the time or the size which you will configure, the data will flow in the same format always. First it will come from forwarder to hot bucket, then it will roll to warm bucket, it will roll to cold bucket, and then it will go to frozen bucket. Okay, so whenever you get data, it will always come to the hot bucket. It will not go to warm, cold or frozen bucket. So initially Splunk receives data in the hot bucket only. Okay, so let's go and save this, and I will show you where are the hot and cold buckets stored. Okay, so let's use the default settings only. Okay, we saved it, and then now here you will see that a new index is created with the name Splunk_training. Okay, and the size of that index is 500 GB, which we just provided as a default, and this will be the default Splunk path. It will store on this default path. Let me show you where this particular index is saved. Okay, so let me open the Splunk home directory. It is in C program files Splunk. Okay, so here under the C program file Splunk, there is one folder where, then lib, then Splunk. Okay, here you will see that the new index is created, Splunk_training. Okay, so when you will open this, you will see there are multiple buckets. This DB bucket is nothing but the hot bucket. Okay, so after a certain period of time, it will move to the warm bucket. So a new folder will be created, and then it will move to the cold bucket, and then it will go to either frozen bucket, and hot bucket also we can use to retrieve the data from frozen bucket. Okay, so this is how the Splunk indexes are created and how we can access those indexes in the folders. Okay, now let me explain you the other default indexes which are in Splunk. So there are some internal indexes of Splunk like _audit, _internal, introspection, telemetry, the fish bucket, history, the main index. This is the index which we just created. This is not the internal index of Splunk. Okay, it also has a Splunk logger and summary indexes. So these all indexes comes with Splunk. Okay, Splunk automatically creates it when you install Splunk in your local environment. Okay, so all these indexes have their separate work, like internal index stores the data of the Splunk internal working. Okay, and audit index will store the audit logs of Splunk internal working. The main index will be used if we will not specify any index for a particular data input. Like you are sending data from forwarder and you have not provided the index. You have not provided the index that in which index that particular data will go and save on the indexer. then it will automatically go to the main index. Okay, so these are some and the Splunk logger for adding the logging, Splunk logging, the summary index we use for the summary indexing purpose. Okay, so these are all the Splunk internal indexes, and these indexes are also stored on the default location. Like here you see that each indexes is stored on this Splunk where live Splunk, and a folder is created for each and every index. These are the all internal indexes folders, and whenever you will create a new index, it will create an index on the same location. Okay, but we can also change that location if we want, and we can specify that location in the new index creation at the time of index creation. Fine, so this is how we can create the indexes in Splunk. Now let me show you how we can retrieve the data from that particular index. Okay, so for that we go to search and reporting app to search the data. Always remember that we search data from the search head, not from the indexer. That's why we added the search pair, so that this search head will communicate to the indexer. Okay, so here I will provide index equal to underscore internal, because I have data in the internal index only at the moment. I have not set up anything else other than the default configurations. Okay, so here you will see that it will show you the index name underscore internal. Okay, so this is how we can create the indexes and how we can search those indexes. All right, now let's move ahead to the next slide, which is Splunk forwarders. Okay, so we discussed about the Splunk search head and Splunk indexers, right? So two components we have discussed, that how we can configure these components in our Splunk environment. So the next component is Splunk forwarder. Okay, so to configure these forwarders, we first have to identify the servers for forwarding events. Okay, so that from which forwarder or from which server we want to send data to the indexer. Okay, so once it is identified, we will go and install Splunk forwarder on the server. You always remember that we will not install Splunk Enterprise on the server, on the forwarder server. We will always install Splunk forwarder. Okay, so Splunk provides a new setup, Splunk universal forwarder. Okay, so we can download it from splunk.com in the same way we downloaded the Splunk Enterprise. Okay, so once it is downloaded, then we go and set up server as a forwarder. Okay, so here is the location of the forwarder, that from which location we can download the universal forwarders. When you click on this link, it will open the splunk.com and it will ask you to log in to download the universal forwarder setup. Okay, so once the setup is available with you, you can go and install forwarder on the machine to forward data. Okay, so basically there are two type of forwarders. One is heavy forwarder and one is universal forwarder. Okay, so universal forwarder we just discussed that universal forwarder we can download from the splunk.com. It is a separate setup other than Splunk Enterprise. Okay, but if you want to set up heavy forwarder, then you have to install full Splunk Enterprise on that particular server which you have identified for the forwarding events. Okay, Now let me tell you that what is difference between heavy forwarder and universal forwarder. Okay. So heavy forwarder is basically we use if we want to do parsing before sending data to the indexer. Okay, and universal forwarder does not do any parsing before sending data to the indexer. Universal forwarder will take the data from the location which we will specify and immediately send the data to the indexer. Okay, but heavy forwarder can use the parsing, like if we want to filter some events, we can filter before sending it to the indexer. Okay, but we cannot do any parsing or filtering from the universal forwarder. But basically normally we use universal forwarder on the forwarders. This is because this is very small in size. Heavy forwarders are the Splunk enterprise instances, and there may be some performance issues on the servers, the forwarder servers. That's why we use universal forwarder. Okay, if we want to do still do the parsing, then we can do that parsing on the indexer. We send data from universal forwarder to indexer, and indexer will do that parsing, which normally does by heavy forwarders. Okay, so it depends on the requirement of the customer that what forwarders he wants to install. If there is enough storage or CPU memory, then they will go and use the heavy forwarders. But if they have very limited resources, then they will use the universal forwarder. Okay, so now let's move to the next slide and see how we can configure the forwarding. Okay, so now we have identified the server from where we want to send the data. We have installed the universal forwarder on those servers, and now we want to configure those server to forward data. Okay, so to do that, we in the same way we go to settings, forwarding and receiving, then we click on configure forwarding, we click on new, and then we provide the indexer name and the port to forward data. Here is the screen which I have mentioned here. This is the forwarding and receiving screen. Let me show you in the Splunk web. Okay, so there is under the settings there is one option, forwarding and receiving, which we use on the indexer configuration also. We use the same options for configure the forwarding. Okay, so let's click on the configure forwarding. There is one button, new forwarding host, and here you have to provide the host and port name. So host is nothing but indexer, that on which indexer you want to send data, and this is the 9997 port which we added on the indexer. Okay, and remember that this 9997 port should be open between indexer and forwarder before sending data. If it is not open, then it will give you errors and it will not send any data to the indexer. Okay, so it is mentioned here also that set as host : port or IP : port. If we don't remember the host name, then we can provide the IP also of that particular server or indexer. Okay, it is mentioned that you must also enable receiving on this host. So we have already added the 9997 port in the receiving, if you remember, when we were doing the Splunk indexer configuration. Okay, so let's go and save this. Okay, so it is saved, and this is now we are assuming this server as a forwarder, and it will now enable to send data to the indexer 1, okay, using this 997 port. Okay, if you want to send data to multiple indexers, then you can again open this, add the new server name indexer2:997. Okay, then save it. In the same way, you can add the multiple for indexers here in which you want to forward that data. Okay, so this is how we can configure the Splunk forwarders. Okay, so once it is done, then it will start sending data to the indexer, because we have added the receiving 997 here on the indexer. Okay, and also once it is set up, the forwarding and receiving is set up, then we can go to search head and search that particular data. Okay, and because we have already added the search pair, under the search pairs we have already added the indexer 1 or indexer 2. Okay, so multiple search pairs we can add. This we discussed, we have already discussed in the search head configuration. Okay, so once it is done, all the configurations are done, we can go to search and reporting app. Then we can use the our newly created index Splunk_training. Currently there is no data because we have not added the data input configurations, right? We just configured the forwarders, we just configured the indexers, we configured the search heads. We have not added any inputs or any files to that particular index, right? So that's why it is not showing you any data. But in the later sessions, when we will discuss about the Splunk data inputs, then we will add a sample file and we will point this particular index to that file, right? So that it will go and store that data in the Splunk_training index. Okay, so let's move to the next slide. We discussed about the Splunk forwarding under the forwarding and receiving, right? Okay, so that's it in the module 2. So in this module we discussed what are the different components of Splunk, like Splunk search head, Splunk indexer and Splunk forwarders, and how we can configure those components in our Splunk environment, right? Also we discussed about the Splunk indexes, that how we can create the Splunk indexes on indexer and where are those indexes are stored, right? And also we discussed about the internal indexes of Splunk. Okay, in the next session, in the module 3, we will discuss about the Splunk licensing, that how we can set up the licensing, and we will also discuss about the Splunk users, roles and authentication, right? Like how we can create the new users in Splunk. Okay, so that's it in the module 2. Thanks everyone for the joining. Thank you. Bye bye.